Hello and welcome to the Big 12 Mafia Show. I'm your host, Nathan Bomber Brown. With me today, we have a special guest, Bob Thompson. Bob Thompson's made it all the way out from the Iditarod to call into our show tonight. How you doing, Bob?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me again, guys.
You bet. I know that we're not going to burn you out, but you coming in every couple months, I think, is going to work out good. We appreciate you spending the time.
My pleasure.
I want to introduce all the key contributors to the show. Obviously, Immaculate View and Moen Sports, and then my partner in crime is the Wild Ute. How you doing today, Ute?
Doing great today. Man, what news today? With smoke going on in the realignment world. We've got Bob Thompson on the Mafia Show. I love it. What a privilege.
We're glad you're here very much. To people joining the show, please subscribe, leave us a comment or suggestion, turn on your notifications so you don't miss these shows in the future, and make sure you follow all of us on Twitter, and that'll help you keep in line with what kind of we're talking about. Today, we're going to be talking about the movement of Notre Dame to the Eastern Countries Conference. Is that okay? Should we talk about that today? I'm just teasing. We won't talk about Notre Dame. All right. My first question is, and I gave you this as a lead up, Bob, is what's your opinion on the restraining order for Washington State and OSU? And what kind of position does that put the Pac-12 in to sort of drive the bus at this point for those two schools?
Well, it's not surprising that they would take that route after the commissioner called a meeting that made it sound like they could vote on certain things going forward, even on things that would happen after these schools have already left. I think the conference was, or excuse me, the two schools were left with no other choice but to go for the TRO. And they went for it in a friendly place in outside of Pullman or in Pullman. And it's not surprising that the judge granted it. I think what they're looking for is some clarity on what the liabilities and the assets are in the Pac-12 and what will remain after these schools leave, because they are leaving, even though they say technically they haven't notified the conference of that. They are leaving. There's no doubt. So it's important for the schools, the remaining schools, to know what's going to be left in the bank account, and I think the schools that are leaving understand that. I think the schools that are leaving are probably saying, well, on our way out, maybe we can grab a few bucks and to help with our transition costs, things like that. And I would expect that about the time that the next round of legal maneuvers requires either requests for depositions, document retention requests, things like that, then the conversations that could ultimately lead to a resolution would begin. No, this isn't going to end up in a courtroom, in my opinion.
Right, negotiated settlement of some sort.
Yeah, they just don't like to air their dirty laundry in a courtroom, and so I would expect that there's some negotiated resolution, and then everybody kind of moves on. The question will be, what's the negotiation and what's left for OSU and WSU to either take with them somewhere else or to use to reconstitute the Pac-12 in some form.
Very fair. Before I turn it over to you, I want to recognize everybody who's here early with us tonight. Glenn Luman was first in the house. He's from the Philippines. We appreciate it, Glenn, although I think he's in Beaverton, Oregon right now. Devil Frog, we have Cougar Tracks, Summit Hawk, and BR is finally back. Good to see you, BR. We need to get your name green again. I miss that a lot. Let's see here. Let me scroll down. James Balk. And Cougar Tracks. Let me just, any others before we're there? Kaufman and Caden's dad and Jared Jones, Ohio State, to wrap it around. All right, Ute, I know you came in hot and heavy with the question. Go for it.
Yeah, I could ask Bob questions all day long. I'm not going to, I promise you. But first off, does anyone have any follow-up though on the WSU Oregon State that you don't want to ask Bob before we kind of jump into a different topic here?
That could go a while, so probably I'll say no.
Okay. So, Bob, one thing that we've been really paying attention to on our shows is really TV viewership numbers. We've been paying attention to that every single week of the season, and we talked yesterday about how important viewership is. It's like as important or more important than wins and losses in some cases when it comes to realignment. So I think we're all aware of TV viewership now and how the importance with media companies. But I was just thinking amongst myself here that what other data points would a media company what they consider that matters in realignment? Okay, you've got the viewership. Really, what else from the media company's perspective are they looking at? It's going to drive.
Well, at the end of the day, you're right. The numbers pretty much drive everything, and TV is a very numbers-based business. Whether it's has to do with selling ads, whether it has to do with selling your networks or cable subscriptions to distributors and for a license fee, it's all about the numbers. And so I think certainly those are without a doubt the most important. I think beyond that, you look at what's the reach of the alumni group. That's one of the things about the Big Ten schools. Those are all huge schools, and so that means they all have huge number of graduates, and those graduates are all over the country. They might go to Michigan for school, but then they go to, they move to LA, or they move to New York, or they move to Chicago, or they move to Dallas, wherever, to ultimately pursue their careers. So the fact that it has a wide reach in terms of alumni support is very important, and certainly that's something that the Pac or the Big Ten has always talked about. Delaney used to quote me his number of Big Ten graduates in Southern California, that type of thing. So that's an important one. I think you also look at kind of the internal rivalries that really move the needle. I think you look at, again, using the Big Ten or using the SEC, the Michigan Ohio State game is always the first pick. And in the SEC, it's, Alabama, Georgia, most likely first pick. And so those kind of rivalries that really move the needle ultimately, respond with great ratings. So that kind of plays into the numbers thing as well. And then like this year, you had the amazing story, which is the, CU, who, been basically, you couldn't find them in a well-lit room for the last 11 years.
Right.
And now they're, front and center and pulling 10 million a week. That's an amazing, absolute amazing turnaround there. And I think they've done a great job with it, and give all the credit to Rick George for going ahead and making that bold move, because, he's been there 10 years and they've been through a few coaches, and he needed to get this one right. And he swung for the fences and he got it.
Did he?
Go ahead, Bomber.
I just follow up. Have you ever seen anything like these numbers that Colorado and Prime have received?
Not yet. I mean, not on a consistent basis. It's almost, they said it's, a reality show, becoming a reality show with the game as the backdrop.
Yep.
And I think the story, it just goes to show you, especially early in the season, storylines like this can dominate the landscape. As you get further down the schedule, it's the matchups, and it's less about the stories. Although, the matchups in themselves are stories. But at the beginning of this season, especially when the first few weeks where you've got these, non-conference blowout games and the payday games, things like that, it's not always great television. Fox took a gamble that this was going to be a good story by grabbing them those first 2 weeks, and they got paid. And, now it's ESPN's turn. They had them. And so, now we go back to Fox. They're going to have probably a little bit of a reset. They play in USC. Then they've got some other games that are going to be, a little tougher. And they've got some games to still play on the Pac-12 networks. So that's when you'll see the numbers will fall down. But I think at this point, what they've done there and the numbers they pulled has been absolutely amazing.
Definitely has. So, one follow up around the alumni base. That's not something that I've ever thought of or considered or anything. So, why is it important to have a lot of alumni in a big market? If we're all talking about TV viewership nationwide and stuff, why would that be valuable to a media company?
Well, I think it's valuable to the media company because then they can drive prices
Hmm.
in those markets and not just in the markets that say have a school located in them.
Understood.
Yeah, that
Thank you.
makes sense. The next question is going off of the three that I gave you, Bob. Is what is your current sense of the current college football playoff negotiations and renegotiations, and what are your thoughts around the 4 or 5 broadcasters that have been rumored to be involved in that? What's your feeling on that?
Well, it's very, very early in the process. We're talking about 4 games here at this point. There is always the possibility that ESPN agrees to open the deal up early and go for an extension, so you could go beyond just the changes to the last 2 years. I think, given the state of the economy, the state of the media business, I'd be surprised if they do that. I think it'd probably be smart for the CFP to probably wait and just deal with these 2 years. So, there's supposedly four or five that made presentations, which is, probably the usual suspects. Supposedly there's, according to what I think Ross Dillinger wrote, there's 4 more that have expressed interest. At this point, he said that they were just doing presentations and they haven't even got to the money side. Once you start talking money, a couple of them will probably scurry away into the night. Because it's going to be a pretty big number. I mean, for the 4 games, I suppose between the 600 million or so ESPN's getting now, they could probably get to $1 billion. Streamers will be interested, I think. I'm not sure it fits for, say, an Apple or Amazon, because it's such a short window of events, 4 events that are going to happen basically in 1 week. I think it'd be better off for a streaming service along the lines of an ESPN Plus or a Peacock, Paramount Plus, like that, because as part of a package where their networks get some games, they maybe get 1 for streaming, something like that. But at the end of the day, I think the CFP is going to want to continue with as much broad reach as possible, and that's likely on the broadcast networks with probably ESPN, ABC combo of some sorts.
Very good. Go ahead, Immaculate.
Do you ever foresee for something like this, or maybe in the future if it's expanded, or if we go to like conference playoffs, where the streamers could have some type of over the top of the exact same content? Now, I know during the regular season when we have a supply heavy situation, that doesn't happen. But in a demand heavy situation with the playoffs and the postseason, do you ever think that could possibly be worked out where you could have both over the air, cable and a streamer covering the same game?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think that, in the regional sports network business, there's a few teams like the Suns are going to start doing that here in Phoenix, where the games are on, I guess it's Channel 3 or for the most part here locally, but there's going to be a streaming element as well that we'll probably have the main game feed, but we'll probably have, some other feeds that, Manning cast like feeds that go along with it. So I think it's possible. I think it opens up the opportunity to do a lot of different things with your telecast, and certainly will attract a certain number of, cord cutters or cord nevers.
Sure.
People who don't have an antenna of some sorts or just basically living off TV, off the internet. You're going to attract some people to the viewer, to the event that way.
I think that's really cool. Let me get to a couple super chats here and then a comment. First, we have BR as a recent resubscriber. Good to see you, BR. And Moen, you're going to do the sounder on that, right, for me? We're still working on timing if Moen's still there.
Get that soundboard going.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for that. And then I'm going to get to this comment from R Webb, who's one of our members. He says, "Great to see Bob on. Bob, as a follow-up to your tweet today, how would you play the CFP restructure if you were the G5 conferences?" And that's a fantastic question, by the way.
Yeah, I think that that all started when Oresco talked yesterday about he was good with the 5-7, and it's kind of struck me as odd. Why would you agree to that yet? And sure enough, he walked it back and said, "Well, we're going to keep the 6-6," and that makes sense for them right now. I'd probably play it the same way, but I'm not going to fall on my sword over it. I would be wanting to guarantee that in the next iteration, it's not just 12 at large. You've got to keep. You're better off having one automatic bid for a long time than two for the next 2 years, and then have the power guys some way try and cut you out of any automatic guarantees or automatic invites.
Absolutely.
And having that access, I think, is what we're all here for. I think the more people involved, the better the product. We just it's that exclusionary part that we're trying to sort of work around, and for the G5s, that's tough.
Oh, for sure, but like 6 spots too, though, guys. 6 spots. I mean, that's a little excessive too.
I don't think
especially 4 power conferences.
I don't think anybody here is saying that they have to have 6.
I think that that whole argument's kind of wild, actually, to try to even make an argument for 6 after everything's shooken out. Anyway, we can get to the super chat, but it's an interesting topic. And I just don't see really where there's any kind of weight where 6 could actually work.
There is if the pack remains.
Yeah, that's if the pack.
So if the pack remains, let's talk about that. If the pack remains,
if you want, that's
the
a tough
champion of the pack would get into the CFP. Is that what the idea is there?
I think what Bob said in his tweet earlier today, he basically said, yeah, they could do that for 2 years and then burn a bridge forever.
Yeah.
And lose all access, right, Bob?
That's his,
yeah, that's and I'm not sure. I saw Immaculate's conversation on that that room or on that chat the other day, or that pod the other day, and it's a very good point. I'm not sure that, like I said today, that ESPN's going to save the money. The question is, what's the CFP going to do with the money? I think more than anything, right. And whether they go to per school amount versus just a lump sum to a conference, and the conference divvies it up. I think they need to go to the per school amount, and that would kind of trump what maybe the Pac-2 is trying to do for a couple of years. I don't know though that they've made that vote yet. A few years back here, Oklahoma, the Big 12 was 10 schools, and now they're up to 16. So that's they're splitting it a whole lot more ways than they used to, and there's really been no acknowledgement of the increase in the size of some of these conferences. And I think with the Pac-12 sitting there with 2, you're going to have to take a look at that.
Jared Jones, a $50 super chat, which is amazing, right? $50. Thank you so much, Jared. He says, Bob Thompson in the house. Oh, this is going to be awesome. You guys rule. Well, there you go, Bob. If you need a positive affirmation.
I'm like I'm like the Pac-12 and Apple getting you guys new subscribers.
Hey, I'm all for that. I'm going to do clapping thing offline or something. So I'm waiting for him to do sounders, and it's not working. It's bad timing. All right. So my next question then is, or wait, Moen, did you have a follow-up? I'm sorry.
I did not, but I don't know why the sound's not working.
Yeah, I couldn't. We're not hearing anything.
I heard some clapping. I heard the clapping.
Before I move on to the big bugaboo in the room, which is Florida State et al. In the ACC, do you guys have any other questions to follow up on Washington State, Pac-12, or the college football playoff?
Well, just to kind of touch upon that, I think he's right. Like it just doesn't cost ESPN anymore. I mean, they're paying the CFP directly, and then the CFP divvies it out. That kind of got misrepresented a little bit, but that's not that big of a deal. But where it comes into interesting is the debate on the payout. Does it go all to the conferences all the same, or is it going to be based upon number of schools? Everything I've seen says that it's just to the conferences, and they never had a chance to change that rule. Had you seen any anything about that, Bob? Have they never got that passed, did they?
No, my understanding is they didn't. I know there was a discussion about it being based on number of schools, and then there was also discussion about maybe putzing around with the incentive-based elements of it, so that conferences that had participating schools, I mean, they get more money now, but they'll get even more, I think, that type of thing. So,
okay.
But my understanding is it didn't get resolved at the last meeting, and then all hell broke loose, and that was probably the last thing on everybody's mind was how are we going to pay out of the CFP.
That seems to be the quotes coming out of there. Is everyone seems to kind of be flabbergasted by this. They didn't see this coming at all.
I can tell you that I'd be really shocked if there's a whole lot written into the CFP articles of incorporation or bylaws or whatever kind of entity it is that discusses a the implosion of one of the 5 conferences.
So and we're looking big picture now. We've talked about the playoff, and we talked about the Washington State and Oregon State and Pac-12 stuff. But really, the other looming monolith out there is Notre Dame, the ACC, and then X number of schools that possibly could be wanting to leave. We went from that not being a big deal to all of a sudden it might happen overnight to now we're cooling back down, but it seems to be up and down. Is that going to be the way until they finally get a settlement?
I think with the ACC, this is the second one who's kind of tested the waters with we're out of here speech.
Right.
I think the story smelled like a plant to me.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of smoke for there not to be some sort of a fire. Is it going to happen, in October, like I've seen written in a couple of places? I have no idea. But I think clearly there was 3 schools who didn't think that what everybody voted for to bring SMU, Stanford, and Cal in made sense. And they've been very, very adamant about that, so much so that a number of them released statements prior to the announcement that they had in fact not voted for it. You don't usually see that kind of stuff in the college sports world. They're, even if they don't agree, they kind of keep their dirty laundry private, and you don't see them coming out and making those kind of things. But it's all going to come down to if there's a bunch of them make a run at trying to get out of that grant of rights, then it's a whole different conversation. And as I said on the first rule of realignment, trust nobody.
So it almost seems like they're codependent. If Oregon State and Washington State, if that actually gets settled, and we all hope that they go to the Big 12, that sort of eliminates that extra conference sitting out there, and they can move on and turn a page. And that might lead to then further steps that would settle further in the ACC, SEC, and Big 10. Do you see it sorting out by the end? Like, I'm looking for a timeline, maybe by the end of this cycle, which I guess the new negotiation is starting now for 2026, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, that depends if ESPN's prepared to go ahead and open it. I doubt they've gotten to the the negotiating window. So, but certainly very soon they're going to have that conversation about 26 and going forward. So yeah, you'd like to think that that's going to be resolved by then, but then you have these grant of rights and you have the conference TV deals, and a number of them are locked in until 2030, 2031, 2036, all in the 30s, more or less. So those deals you don't even start talking on those for a couple of, at least till 2028, something like that. So once we get through the CFP and we see what happens with, the Pac-2, and we see what happens in the ACC, I'm sure something else will come up. But I think for now, those are the 3 that we got to look at to be resolved, to kind of get an idea where all this talk about realignment and those type of things finally put to bed for at least a few years.
This brings up a question that I had thought about months and months ago, and I think I lost track of the thread on Twitter. But how do you feel about these broadcast companies? And Kenneth Evans has a comment here about building studios and doing remote commentating for games. Fox, I think, was the first broadcaster to start doing that. Were you involved in any of those decisions? And what do you think about, is that an experiment that's gone awry? I personally don't like it, but I'm curious what you think.
No, I was not involved. That was came after me. I think, a lot of it was increased during the pandemic.
Right.
As
Right.
productions moved into the cloud, and the necessity to have announcers and a lot of the production staff even on site was diminished significantly. I think there's a loss. I think there's a loss for the viewer in that they don't necessarily get the full
Fidelity is the word
Yeah,
that comes to
you're
mind.
missing out. There's been some glaring problems where quarterback was missed, that type of thing, and it's stuff that you would know if you had been there. That they would have known if they had been there. And
Okay.
I think it's tough, and I don't know how much money they actually save. I mean, if you're talking about sending, to a play-by-play, a color, and a sideline from LA to Phoenix in a couple nights hotel, you're not talking about a ton of money. And
Right.
they are still doing these typical productions from a behind-the-scenes standpoint in terms of cameramen and things like that. But to do the announcing remotely, I think, is a bit of a mistake. These guys have done multiple games in one day, so I guess there's a scenario there where it probably saves you some more money. But I don't really care for it, and I think it's I can see why they did it during the pandemic, but I think the pendulum swung a little too far. Pretty much everybody on the RSN side is back to traveling than their announcers. Few teams aren't, but more or less everybody is, and I would like to see Fox kind of, pick it up here as far as sending announcers. It seems like it's just the FS1 games at this point.
It is.
Yep.
Yeah. Opie has a $10 super chat. He says this episode's better than the old Hollywood Squares. I want to make
Nice,
sure we
Opie.
called that out.
You're
Hollywood
dating
Squares.
yourself, Opie.
Yes, definitely. I miss the Hollywood Squares. Okay. All right,
Yeah.
Immaculate.
All right, I'm going to wade into this one very carefully with you, Bob. But I think that you, maybe of anyone involved in talking about this, has the best perspective on this. I don't see any impetus for the networks to help the situation out. ESPN hands out the money. They don't really care beyond that. ESPN and Fox have already looked at OSU and WSU for a conference like the Big 12. They're pretty much standard where they're at. But for the other conferences, I think we can probably all say that they have a lot to gain or lose based upon how the situation goes. This is kind of a reverse situation, what everyone likes to say. They like to say how the networks are in charge and the networks control this. How, in this case, do the conferences influence the networks to do something that's not maybe in their best interest? Is that possible?
Sure. You could offer extensions to existing deals, and there's a value in that.
Okay.
The networks get certainty as their cost structure going forward. So that would be the first thing. I mean, over the years, I had many people come back to me and say, we have a problem. Can you help us out of our problem? And so what we would do is structure something such that it got them to their, where they want to be, yet we got something out of it as well. So whether it was, we changed the payment schedule, we added years, there's a bunch of things you can do to kind of bridge the gap so that both sides become, to use an overused term, win-win in this type of a situation. And I think the fact that OSU and WSU, have been, playing well, which is good, that they do bring some value to conferences. And they may be bringing a fat wallet with them themselves as well. So, as I said, a wallet full of personality will get you a long ways.
It's the storylines.
Yeah. So it's,
There's a
again, that's why they need to find out what happens with what the liabilities and assets are in the Pac-12. And, there's NCAA credits. The Rose Bowl owes them some money. They owe the Holiday Bowl some money. They owe Comcast $50 million. There's a bunch of money going back and forth, and they got to figure out where it's all at before they really decide if they even want to mess around with what's left of the Pac-12, or if they just walk away like everybody else does.
This comment from Devil Frog, I thought from the moment I first heard the idea, and I know John is one of your friends, John Canzano, who originally put out that idea of the SMU buying their way into the Pac-12. What was that, 3 or 4 months ago?
Right.
And it had been an idea that had even been older than that, but had surfaced again and then finally comes through to the SMU. Do you believe that SMU to the ACC was a poison pill? And will it eventually lead to the bigger brands consolidating again into the Big 12, SEC, and Big 10?
I don't know. I think, the SMU has been looking to get into a Power 5 for years and years. Right. There was a former executive at Fox who went to SMU, and they were just obliterated by that whole death penalty and getting kicked to the curb. And they got a lot of money around there too. I'll tell you that. So it doesn't surprise me that they were able to pull it off at all. Is it the death knell for the ACC? I don't know. I think if you're going to do what they did, I think SMU, as far as expanding all the way to the West, I think SMU does bring some things in that it, for lack of a better word, it's a good stopover place on your way to San Francisco.
Right.
And you could do a lot of things there on the way. And they've talked about maybe using some of the facilities in Dallas, Fort Worth area, of which there's a lot, to stage various competitions that would be more like tournaments,
right?
Like they do with gymnastic meets and track and field meets, things like that. And so it kind of would ease the pain for a lot of the Olympic type sports having to travel so far. But that death knell, I don't know. It's an interesting question, and that it could be. There's a lot of talk that's what they're all upset about. I think in the terms of the ACC, what they're upset about is they're not getting paid enough.
You're right. Well, it's the root of all evils. That's what, the money is where it's where the people get messiest. And we've seen that over and over again. You have one final question?
Yeah, I do. I have a final question here. So, Bob, you quote tweeted an article today from The Athletic. I was speaking about the Big 12, Brett Yormark, and them holding on for Arizona, right? And you made mention again that there was no mention in the article really of any media companies being involved, Fox or whoever, right, being involved in that. It was just the presidents and everything. So can you walk us through this again? Because I think we all need a re-education really on how realignment works, like from a fundamental level and stuff, like the A through Z, and who's driving the bus here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't take my comments to mean that TV is not involved. They're absolutely involved, but I think they're more reactive than they are proactive in that it would not be unusual for someone, in a position at one of these networks to get a phone call from a commissioner or an athletic director that says, "Hey, we're thinking about expansion and we're thinking about these schools. What's it worth? Is there any worth, and how much?" And, we would run the numbers. They normally have hired a consultant of some sorts themselves. And so they probably have a pretty good idea of what the numbers are. And then it's just a matter of seeing if it makes sense. But for the most part, there was not a lot of expansion discussions that I was involved in, but there was a lot of expansion. There were some things that we did in 2010 that kind of gave the right for Longhorn Network to launch and be distributed outside of Texas. but we got something for it. We got an extension, and we, again, it was like I was talking about earlier. If you're trying to, meet in the middle, both sides got to get something. So I think the misunderstanding that people have is that somehow TV is driving the bus. I mean, we pay for the gas, right? But we're not driving the bus. We have no vote. I never made a vote. We never told somebody to vote a certain way. And these presidents and chancellors and the top administrators at these institutions, they're big boys and girls. They make the votes, and they need to understand that there's repercussions to those votes, and you can't. People want to just blame it all on TV. That it's just not how it is. I understand it, and I've kind of done it till I'm blue in the face. It was nice to see, Magnus was interviewed on one of those pods with Marcia and Oren, and he said the same thing. And then you read Max's article today in The Athletic, and it's really no mention of TV. The only TV that was mentioned was that, they didn't get a deal with Apple.
Right.
And, so what? Is it Apple's fault? I just think that what came out in that article was more like what I would have expected to have happened. Sure, Fox agreeing, or whoever agreed on the Big Ten to pay $30 million for Oregon and Washington, that that had something to do with it, sure. But I don't think Fox was sitting there saying, we got to take him because we want to blow up this conference so Apple doesn't get to college football.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just, it's just not how it works. So I thought it was a great story. I think it showed the tenacity of Brett and what he was, trying to accomplish, and the fact that the Big 12 was, really solid together on this, and that the Big 12 remembered, but, for the grace of God, it could have been them a few years ago. Right. And I thought that was a very poignant quote that somebody said, if we don't do this, it may be us down the road. Mm-hmm. So I think, they were very smart about it. And I think the Pac-12, played it poorly. I've certainly said that enough times, but, it is what it is. And now we move on, and hopefully we can find some place where Oregon State and Washington State can live that's acceptable to them.
Thanks, Bob.
So, Bob, you've been on our show now twice. And I assume you don't mind spending just a little bit of time with us when you come in and do this. Do you have any questions for us? Anything? We're a little closer to the everyman. We're dealing with, Immaculate's on the front lines every day fighting the good fight.
I got some bruises.
Do you have any questions for us about what we've seen or anything like that?
Well, what's your general consensus on the whole idea of geography going away? To me, that was always one of the attractions of college football and basketball, was the geographic relevance. And now it's kind of gone. And does that matter, or do you guys think that ship sailed? So what?
I think it matters. Yeah, I think it matters because you talked about rivalries, right? Your rival's not going to be across the U.S. Your rival's going to be in the same state or close by. So it's easy to, brush those aside and jump into a different conference, but there are impacts, down the line and everything with that. So, we're trying to bring rivalries even back to the Big 12. There's a lot of talk and stuff that maybe one day like Pitt will come back, play West Virginia again. So there's a lot of dreaming about that type of stuff, and I think geography does matter at the end of the day, and we're realizing that in every realignment move that pushes us away, we're going to realize that even more, and people are going to long to go back to that way and stuff, but really it's largely driven by the rivals and the teams that you played for many years.
Immaculate?
Yeah, in terms of geography, what we're seeing, it's kind of a two-way street here. I think we're finding out that it matters more than ever, as you're saying, with rivalries. More often than not, those are based off of close geographic positioning. But at the same time, I think that, especially with maybe some of the younger folks, they're not quite living the same way we did, in that I don't think geography matters as much to them. I think that they're looking if they're interested in this, they're looking more at matchups.
Right.
They don't care so much that your state is next to our state, and like look at Colorado. Look how many people are getting into that
Mhm.
didn't know anything at all about them last year. And do they care if Colorado is playing Nebraska next door, an old rivalry, or Colorado State, or are they more interested in Colorado versus Oregon? Or going forward, maybe some of their matchups in Texas because of Dion's connections to Texas. So what I think is very interesting, I was going to talk to you about, is the Olympic sports. And you're saying how in the ACC, that they may have to figure out something between conferences, because there is no easy answer for that one. I certainly don't know. And
Right.
it's a mess out there. Everyone's got different opinions.
Yeah, I think it's that's something that's going to have to be dealt with, because Chip Kelly's been promoting this idea that football's separate, and that may very well be where it has to be at some point down the road. That brings to mind another question, and my belief is that the next round is, instead of expansion from kind of the bottom up, it's going to be the top out.
Yeah.
And that you're going to end up with the kind of the super conferences, and some of the folks not necessarily pulling their weight in some of these big conferences might be looking in a situation similar to what Oregon State and Washington State are looking at. And there's been a lot of stuff floating around, and a guy over at Boise State.
It was the AD, I think.
Yeah, assistant
Deputy
AD.
assistant.
Yeah. He put together a plan, and he's, I got a hold of him, and he sent it to me, and it's very interesting. And that's the whole relegation model. And it's got some really good things in it. And I'm wondering what and I've seen that when I used to deal with a lot of international soccer, how that works and how important those relegations and demotion games are. And I think it creates some, extra value from a television standpoint. It makes some games that are otherwise not worth a whole lot worth something. What do you guys think about that from the standpoint of, from a fan interest? Let's forget about that, conferences might get riled up again, or racked, raced through again. What do you think about relegation and promotion?
So I'm going to let Moen answer both of your questions, Bob, and then I'll answer, and then we can have everybody else answer.
You're going to ask the Ohio State guy that question? Oh,
so the relegation question, Moen, and then also he asked you a question about, geography, and how do you feel about that?
I hate relegation. I don't think it'll ever happen.
Okay.
I don't believe it'll happen in the Big Ten anyway. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, we look out for our smaller schools in our conference, Indiana, Northwestern, etc. I see some people in the chat don't like that, but that's the way it is. It's one for all and all for one. There is no unequal revenue distribution coming either. We're kind of all in the same boat. So I don't think it'll ever happen. At least not in the Big Ten. As far as geography, I think the bigger the conference gets, you might be able to carve it out more. I've discussed this a little bit with like a 20-team conference, carving out a pod on the East Coast, a Midwest pod, a Great Plains pod, a West Coast pod, to maintain those regional rivalries while also giving you marquee matchups when you do cross-pod games.
I think, and as far as geography goes, I'm in a unique position because BYU has been geography less for 50 years. It go anywhere, anytime, and play. BYU will play anywhere, anytime, and so I know it can be done, but it takes a lot of institutional security and strength, which we've seen not every institution has that, and it also takes an all-in commitment to be willing to foster the breaking the geography parts down. But one thing that I would never want to get rid of, and that is the rivalries. As you put it, I mean, the Holy War to us is like fantastic.
It's
And
everything.
every one of us has a rivalry like that. And Washington and University of Oregon for you, Bob. Those are really important. And I hope we keep those. As far as relegation goes, I'm a fan of English Premier League soccer. It took me 7 years to figure out how relegation worked, all the way down from if amazing documentary is the Wrexham documentary. Have you guys been watching that? The Ryan Reynolds. They bought a team that wasn't even in the upper leagues, and it finally got promoted after 15 years. And they're going to try to build that up to eventually they have their goal as being in the Premier League. The good part about that system, it's merit based. You earn your way in. And I think there's a lot to that meritocracy in the United States that we like that. We reward people for working hard, and we don't like it so much when people either write a check to just get benefits for no sacrifice, or they're sort of grandfathered in without really being relevant for a long period of time.
Well, just to add to that real quick, I as an Iowa guy, I'll agree. I do not see it happening with the Big Ten. One, the bottom half presidents are not going to give that any time of day because they're basically just kind of voting themselves out, and they know that. And there's too much pay differential between the conferences at the top. But once you get down to the G5, I have to admit it starts to make a little more sense because your pay differential between the conferences is less. So maybe as a budgeter, as someone at the school who's having to figure out how you're going to cover all expenses, it doesn't kill you if you do get relegated. I know with the relegation system over there, for like, what is it, 2 or 3 years, once you get relegated, you're still getting the pay that you were getting before.
Right.
So
The parachute.
yeah. So I could see it. I mean, and I think that could draw eyes that they couldn't draw before, because it kind of works in doing that. It gives you a reason to follow. So, but once you try to bring that up into the top levels, I'm having a hard time believing it.
No, that's a good point, and I think his plan was really with G5, all G5 conferences. Yep. And I think that might be something that would make them a bit more attractive to television. I agree with Moen that I don't know that the other conferences are going to do that or be open to that, the P5 or the P4s. End of the day, though, if the TV money is going to keep coming, it's just like what happened in Europe with the Super League.
Blew up.
They got floated and it blew up, but that doesn't mean it's not going to get floated again.
Right.
Yeah. Real Madrid still trying to keep it around.
Yeah.
They're working very hard to restore that. So I think relegation for the G5s is fantastic. I also think that the AQ conferences, what's now 4, they could do something different and they could coordinate and work together. But there's a lot of money to go around. I know that. You didn't say anything about relegation. What do you think about the idea as a principle?
Well, let me ask you guys a question. Would it add more intrigue than a non-relegation or a current scenario for the G5 league?
I think it does.
I don't think anyone would argue that, right?
Yeah.
More eyeballs would be on it because a team's going to get relegated, and plus, playoff berth might be on the line either way and stuff. But I think that it just adds more value and more eyeballs, more storylines, like we've talked about already, and everything to bump up the media value. And that's what really the goal would be for adding relegation. I love the idea of relegation. I would love it across college football. I would love if the Big Ten and the SEC did that and stuff, so a team like Utah can make it up, right? Like the power to.
I mean,
why wouldn't we do something like that? It's the ultimate meritocracy. I love that idea and stuff. Being able to keep building and building and getting into the biggest league based on your performance on the field. I think it's a fantastic idea. I would love to see it everywhere.
Yeah, the guy at Boise State, Mike Walsh is his name. He had some, one of my comments when I talked to him is, I'm going to say, is the spreads between one conference, the top conference, and then the next tier. There's got to be some understanding of, it can't be a ton of money. There's got to be some sort of parachute or
Right.
something that people need to be able to budget. They
Yeah.
don't
That's
know
the
how much-
hardest part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
know how much
the
money-
ugly side of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
business.
I don't think the spreads can be huge, but there needs to be enough of a spread. I think the other thing that you see in the European leagues is you take a big hit sponsorship side, and that's tough. So yeah, I don't know that it necessarily works at the top, but I do think at some point there's going to be a reimagining of college football because I don't think you can expand a whole lot more. The only way to expand is to kind of separate.
It's consolidation, not expansion necessarily.
Yeah, that's really what it is. And the question becomes, how many get consolidated?
Right.
So Bob, so the sponsors don't like the relegation model because of the lack of consistency and dependability on the teams in the upper division?
No, it's because you're in a quote lesser league all of a sudden.
Lesser league also.
Advertising dollars, not as many people watching, so it's not as
Understood,
valuable.
like at the school itself in this case, or at the soccer team.
Could probably
Well,
affect NIL and transfer portal too these days. So that's a big unknown that we're just getting into, and trying to balance both things at once might be a big mess.
Bob, do you know this too? Do you know, like, for the relegation games in the soccer league, are those like the most highly viewed games, or like those almost as highly viewed as like champion
No,
games?
it's not like that.
No,
It's
they're not
viewership,
not that much, but it's just, I mean, it's a big weekend out there.
Right.
when those games happen. And I mean, if you ever look at a map, just to look at the United Kingdom, how many soccer teams there are, it's amazing.
Yes.
It's absolutely amazing for a country that size that has that much in terms of sports. So yeah, I think the sponsor side, it's really just more about not being in the top tier anymore and getting the exposure of a top tier league.
It's more the fight for survival than it is about the promotion of the lower league. It's like Leicester went down, and they've been in the Premier League for almost 30 years. They got demoted, and they had to fire half their crew because they couldn't afford to keep them around because they weren't in the Premier League anymore. It's a big deal. You'd have to come up with some interesting economics to make it work, even in the G5 level. All right, we've talked so much, Bob. You have stayed a lot longer than I intended to keep you around. We really appreciate all your feedback, and it's nice to hear, that you asked us questions, trying to sort stuff out. And is there anything you want to leave with everybody? We'll do this again in a couple months. And
I see this. I'd be happy to. I see this question here. Did the Big 12 pay Colorado $2 to $3 million?
Yeah, I was going to close with that.
I don't know. I mean, I heard that somewhere, and if it is, maybe it was, to deal with transition costs or, change out signage or who knows what. But I've never heard of anybody being paid a signing bonus. So
it's
if they did.
I attributed that one to your Mark and his business mind.
Well, I want to congratulate Cougar Tracks, who's been a member for a month. Thanks for being here, Cougar Tracks. That's really important to us. And then this other one's from Kaufman. He's been a member for 2 months. Last question or statement, he says, "Wow, 2 months doesn't seem that long. Great work every time, gentlemen." So that goes to all of us. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for being here, everybody. Please subscribe. Watch us on Twitter. Let me get this comment off the screen. So you follow all these people on Twitter. We have a great community, and Bob, you're magnificent. I hope to get you back at the end of October, maybe 1st of November, when we're getting closer to those next top 10 and top 20 discussions.
Sounds good. You
All
guys
right.
have a good week.
Very
Bob.
good.
Good seeing you, Bob. Have a good one.
You have a good month. We'll talk to you later.
All right, take care.
Okay, see you later.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, you guys, I've been filled up. I'm full now. How are you guys feeling?
Man, that's right.
Oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say. I'm sort of out of words.
You might
Anything
have to
you guys
move
wanna
that up
close
to
with?
every month. That's always good times whenever he comes around.
Yeah, very much. Let's see. What's this say? Sergeant Pickles. Good to see you, Pickles, by the way. You're a little late, but it's good to see you.
He was here.
Would love to know if professional relegation works with only a 10% gap in revenue from the best team to the very worst team. So again, looking at the model that's in England, all the teams in the Premier League get the same amount of money. It's a flat fee from the BBC, Sky Sports, NBC. all that media money is evenly distributed. Below that, each conference gets a lesser amount. And we've talked about that on our show many times, is the lower you go in the system, the less money you get. And that's really the challenge to a relegation model. You'd basically have to have top schools like Ohio State willing to give away some of their money to subsidize this relegation model beneath them. And does anybody see anybody agreeing to that?
Well,
on
Ohio
their
State's already doing that with Indiana.
own? Well,
And that's exactly why Indiana is never going to vote for that.
Come on, be honest, Bowen. Like that, you know that Ohio State's going to make this move and want unequal revenue.
Everybody pays for everybody. Listen, Indiana brings a lot to the conference. Indiana brings shooty hoops, corn.
You know,
my hell.
They
people on
do
the
a
outside of the
lot of
Big Ten,
research.
they don't quite get it. I think they think that we're just saying that it's just a talking point, and I get that, but that's the case in the Big Ten. How long has the Big Ten been around for, Mullen? Like 1800? What was the?
Well, if you go back to the Western Conference, it's
Yeah.
1890 something, I believe, 1892.
Yeah, that's
Like,
crazy.
it's just ingrained there. Like the idea of kicking Indiana down the road or kicking.
I don't see it.
It's hard for people like we want in, and I'm like, I get it, but it's just not happening. And they're so tied in with like their logistics buying program, part of the Big Ten Athletic, that you start to throw them around. It gets kind of goofy.
I don't see how you guys could have that perspective. Like, I'm so certain that's going to happen. Like, it, for me, it's like it's so simple to see just based on the dollars.
No.
And like Bob even said that. Just a
Well,
second
he
ago,
says
he said that he sees
can
the
see
super
the
conference.
idea,
Is
but-
Indiana going to be in the super conference? No.
I don't
Like,
think
it's
I didn't
happening,
want to go
guys.
into it because I didn't want to challenge it, but I don't see it happening. And I see how, from like a position of people saying that this could happen, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I could see it happen. We could do that. We could sell that." But in terms of actually doing that and making that happen, if people think what's going on right now with the PAC and the CFP and those two schools is ugly and messy, what you're talking about goes to a whole nother level. Like it'll be a hurricane of messiness. I think it's just a threat to maneuver the NCAA and to get more power, more rule making power. That's what it really is. 'Cause that's what they did in 2014. You know, when with the stipend, they threatened to leave the NCAA, and they got the autonomous conferences for it. And so it's like, if it worked once, let's do it again.
We're gonna wrap this up. This has been an amazing hour. I want to leave with Devil Frog gave us $10. He says, "I'd rather see conference playoffs before national than relegation." So
Oh, absolutely.
I'll leave you with
what a
that.
good comment. Devil
That's what
Frog.
Devil Frog's a stud, and he's been with me from
That's
the
what I'm
beginning.
hoping for. I'm hoping for those conference playoffs.
Bomber, I just have one last thought here too.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
With this ACC smoke going on, I think that the Big 12 needs to get uber aggressive about going after ACC schools that they can pull.
I agree.
I think that it's something that we need to talk about a lot. I think that we need to get to 20 teams and we'll look at poll, at least 20 teams, look at pull the best quality
Right.
ACC squads over. And I guarantee you, Yormark's on the phones already, working this thing just like he was with the PAC. But it's no time to sit back, and the Big 12 needs to be very aggressive with this.
The Big 12 may be the first conference to 22 or 24.
Could be.
Could be.
It
I'd
could
love
happen.
to know what those 10 things are that Yormark said that he wanted to do for the Big 12 when he got interviewed. If I could find out, if I could ask one thing, like of anyone, like just to give me I want to know what that is, because he
Just
even
so you know, I've got a pending request to him for over a year.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That he sent me one DM and I said, "Welcome to the Big 12, but BYU fan here. Love all your support." And he sent me a thing back. He said, "Thanks, glad to be here." So I've got a DM open with him. So
saving it. It's like
hey,
so
work
far
that
down
channel.
the list.
see.
Work that channel, Bomber.
Hey, look, I just had the great Godfather Bob Thompson on our show.
Hey, he
Yeah,
brought it
you
up to
can't do
Joel
better than
Klatt.
that.
We could, he brought up to Joel Klatt. He likes to talk about his little whiteboard of ideas, so you never know.
All right, let's get out of here. I'm really tired. Let's meet tomorrow. We're going to do a tomorrow show since we're not doing a Friday show. We talked about doing that earlier, guys. What time are you thinking?
What to see?
Wanna do
Earlier is
7
actually-
Eastern?
Earlier is actually better.
7
Well-
7 Eastern?
That works for me, but mowing might be really freaking high because I got to go get a back injection, and
Oh,
okay.
I love it.
so
Those
gotta
are the
get 'em
days
on.
you want. Are you
We have to
kidding
get
me?
him on.
He's like, Thursday's my day.
Let's
My-
do that.
I can't do any worse than I did last week. So
Okay, all right. We'll do it tomorrow. I'll send out the invite. It'll probably be 7 Eastern. We invite all of you to join us tomorrow. We're going to do our weekly pick'ems and do something with that crow. I don't know what we do with that
the sounds are finally working, huh?
crow. Hey, finally. Yeah.
There's the Jayhawk
A
squawk.
little late to the party, by the way. Thanks to everybody for your super chat. Really quick, let's run through those. VR's a member again. Good to see you, VR. Jared Jones, $50. Opie Didon, $10 with a comment. Cougar Tracks, member for a month. Kaufman, member for 2 months. And last but not least, Devil Frog. Thanks and appreciate everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a great night, and we will talk tomorrow. Peace out.